Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for a bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson.
Good morning.
How you doing today, Jay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine, actually. Before we start this show, I want to mention to listeners that we're considering, or we're thinking about maybe trying to create a network of independent, bipartisan politics podcasts. So if you know of a podcast that fits that bill, we would love to hear about it. Now, we're already aware of Pantsuit Politics. We did a host exchange with them a while back. Then there's the Policy Scout and More Perfect Union. But we're betting that there are probably some great shows out there that we don't know about. So if you have a lead for us on a bipartisan show that's not affiliated with, a big news organization or network, we're focusing on sort of scrappy outsiders like us, definitely let us know. And you can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com, through our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page, or through a tweet or message on Twitter. We're at politicsguys. Thanks so much. All right, to start with today, Jay, I thought we would start with the budget, that bipartisan $1.3 trillion spending bill Congress passed on Friday, which narrowly averted a government shutdown. Now, the 2,000-plus page bill was pushed through, lightning fast, with leaders of both parties seemingly unconcerned that their members had essentially no time to review it. And of course, that's something that Republicans in particular have raised significant concern about in the past. Read the bill.
Right.
But in broad strokes, as I've been able to take from it, the bill addresses the major Republican priority, which is increasing defense funding. It provides $78 billion more. And for Democrats, it pleased a lot of them because it increased domestic spending by about $52 billion. Though one person who clearly wasn't very happy with the bill was President Trump, who on Friday tweeted a veto threat before ultimately signing the bill. And it makes sense to me because the president's budget was essentially thrown out the window by Congress. But it seemed to me that what was particularly difficult for President Trump was border wall funding. Only $1.6 billion of around $18 billion that was in his budget request was funded, and even that much smaller amount came with significant restrictions on how it could be spent, and it really provides for almost no new border wall construction. It was mostly repairs and that sort of thing. And, initially on Twitter, the president attempted to kind of spin this as a victory, but I think as more and more media reports claimed that it wasn't, he got pretty upset, which led to his veto threat. And then, of course, he signed it, but saying, well, I've signed this, but I won't do it in the future. And Congress should give me line item veto authority, which it's really, you would expect that the president of the United States would know that the line item veto was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in Clinton versus City of New York. But maybe that's too much to expect of the president of the United States. I don't know. But anyway. Also, I should mention, congressional conservatives were also pretty unhappy, obviously because of the increased spending. I love what Louisiana Republican Senator John Neely Kennedy said. He said, the Democrats love this bill like the devil loves sin. I don't understand why when President Obama does what we're about to do, it's bad for the country, but when we do it, it's good for the country. And so, Jay, I wanted to ask you what you think about that. I mean, our Rand Paul...
God bless him.
So you're with Rand Paul, John Neely Kennedy, and the House Freedom Caucus on this, and not really with Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and Chuck and Nancy.
Well, I think, first of all, I just have to point out the fun irony that one of the other things that Trump lamented was that the bill was rushed and people didn't get a chance to read it. And much like you, and I just wanted to point out that you and the Donald are on the same page about really caring about process.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
That said, I think Republicans looked at this as they were afraid to have a shutdown. They would be blamed for, so they caved. And I think it's unfortunate, and I think it's also unfortunate that Trump could have played this better. I mean, if he had made the sort of veto threats earlier in the process and said, "Here's what I will accept, here's what I won't accept," that gives the congressional Republicans something to sort of back them up, to know that the president has their back, and gives them sort of the incentive and the ability to dig in deep on fighting on spending. But it's different if there's no direction, and again, they really don't know what's going to happen, and Trump can kind of flip flop back and forth, and that's I think a big, I'll say, a lack of leadership from the White House, as far as coming in saying these are the priorities. Here's where we need to hold the line. That's not to say that you can't compromise on some things, but yeah, the number is huge, and again, this is one of the frustrations that a lot of Republicans have, particularly conservative Republicans, particularly fiscally conservative Republicans, is that you control every branch of government, but spending on domestic programs keeps rising at an ever increasing rate. And I guess my other comment would be, so often we sort of, you and I and the country wishes for sort of this book bipartisanship. Why can't we all just get along? But then when you see it, it's not always really what the result isn't always as rosy as you would hope.
Right. Well, I actually, I actually like a lot of what's in the bill, and it was certainly bipartisan. I mean, in the Senate, it passed 65 to 32, in the House, it was 256 to 167. So these were some, some pretty significant margins here, and there are some good things in the bill. Like, for instance, there's a provision improving the NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. The Republicans will agree to language that said that federal funds actually can be used to research gun violence.
Right. Oh, I didn't even mention that. You've got your research finally.
So, at least the saying that it can be spent. We'll see if it actually is. But other things, I believe there was $380 million to states to improve election-related cybersecurity, $300 million for counterintelligence funding for the FBI for Russian hacking. So, there's some pretty good stuff in here, and on the whole, I think it's a pretty significant win in an era where we don't really get a whole lot of those. And the one thing, though, I do have, you jokingly mentioned the process thing, but I think it's important. I should also point out that when they took power in Congress, the Republicans created something called the 3-day rule, and it was this mandate that no bill would be voted on until the third day after it was released. And this was done under John Boehner, but repeatedly, both Boehner and Ryan have violated the rule, but never on something this big. And of course, this came from the whole Obamacare thing, where Republicans were incensed that they didn't have any time to read the bill. And so once again, it seems like there are very few people who are standing on principle here. I don't agree with Rand Paul on a lot, but at least Rand Paul more or less stands on principle here, and there's maybe something to be said for that. But process essentially always seems to take a backseat to political expediency.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention, though, on process is, just because something's not in the bill or the whole bill isn't there doesn't mean it hasn't been looked at. Now, with these big budget omnibus things, there's always sort of things that are sort of I don't want to say sneaky, because that implies something that I don't want to imply. But the bigger provisions, everyone knows what they're talking about. It's just sort of dickering over the money. Now, again, there are going to be some little policy surprises that are hidden throughout this that come to light later.
Yeah, more than a few. And, with anything this big and complex, the more eyes you have on it, the more things you catch. And so to me, this is just the leadership wanting Congress to be run by the leadership without that interference from those pesky members. And, democracy is a messy process, and actually things would go a whole lot better if there were some leadership from the top, at least in the executive branch. But of course, and you talked about this a little bit before, about, having Donald Trump having the back of Congress. And it's pretty clear to me that Donald Trump has no one's back but Donald Trump's. Mm-hmm. And so that makes the process much more difficult.
Well, this isn't a political point, but sometimes I wonder if it's just a matter of um, sometimes if everyone were always to look so closely at the legislation that is put together, if all that time were added, would anything ever get passed?
Well, you know,
And because I mean, I think it's an argument that um, a lot of times the reason anything gets done is sort of, work expands to the time allotted to complete it.
sure.
When you have these budget deadlines and so forth, things are necessarily left to the last minute, because if you didn't have the deadline, you wouldn't pass anything. There would always be something that someone can find objectionable. And if you don't have those looming deadlines and it's in a rush, there's always something that someone else can ask for more. Um, so I mean, sometimes I think it's just, it's part of democracy. It's part of human nature in terms of, I certainly know in my world of, when you're trying to settle a case or something, um, if you if you were allotted infinite time to do that, it would necessarily never settle. But if you have a trial date coming up next week, well, then you got to get it done.
Yeah.
So
But also, of course, this is not how things have always been. The last 15, 20 years, yes, but before that, there certainly is, a lot of time allotted. The president's budget generally comes out around February, and Congress has until October to get this done. And so, this gets tied into polarization and other things like that. But given that this is a core function of Congress, you could argue the core function of
right,
Congress, funding government operations, this should be a priority. And this is a crisis of Congress's own creation.
agreed. I'd agree with you on that.
All right, well, let's move on. There are more developments on the tariff front this week. President Trump announced that the administration would be imposing $60 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods in response to widespread Chinese intellectual property theft and their regular coercion of U.S. companies to give up trade secrets in exchange for access to the Chinese market. Now, China responded to this by threatening billions of dollars in retaliatory tariffs, which raised the possibility of a trade war. And markets responded with a fairly sharp drop. And there are many people in the business community, though, clearly in agreement that intellectual property theft by China is a significant problem, that they're not supporting these tariffs.
Right.
Now, along the same line, or at least the same area, the president also backed off his earlier tariffs on steel and aluminum. He gave short-term exemptions to the EU and a number of other countries. And this is in addition to the previous exemptions that were given to Mexico and Canada, while NAFTA renegotiation talks still go on. So I was wondering what you think about these latest moves, Jay, starting with the China piece.
Well, there's two parts of it, and I think you pointed out there is an issue with China doing things that are unfair, that violate the intellectual property laws, that violate existing trade laws, and it does create an unfair playing field. And there are procedures set forth to address those things. Now, one of those procedures is not just unilaterally raising tariffs on everything from China, and that's the problem. Is I think the president is sort of mixing and matching and kind of conflating the two issues. To say China is violating some trade agreements, I think that's fair, and you call them out on it. But the response of, well, we have a trade deficit with China, so therefore we're going to impose tariffs on all Chinese goods. That's sort of shooting just with a blunderbuss kind of thing, and really missing the target you're after, and to some extent squandering the moral authority you have on that specific target of, look, if they're cheating, they're stealing stuff, all right, well, we'll stop it and we'll impose a remedy that goes directly to that.
Yeah, they're actually trying to do that. I mean, the tariffs,
Well,
I understand the tariffs are
both.
focused on, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Is you could do one, the one, say 301, Section 301 sanctions without, broader tariffs on all aluminum and steel.
Yeah, but sure. I see what you're saying.
And that's, I'm sort of get the sense that, the anti-trade voices in the Trump White House, and I suppose Trump himself, sort of don't see the difference. Now, the other possibility is that this is Donald Trump being Donald Trump, and he's going to start off with I'm going to, have a trade war, and this is going to, be huge, and I'm going to, put tariffs on everything, and then back off as he has already, and that, well, this is just kind of a negotiating point. So we'll see how that plays out. But the market has certainly taken concern that it's not just Trump negotiating.
Well, I'm actually, and this is something that really comes out of my mouth, but I'm actually at least somewhat sympathetic to the administration's approach here. Believe it or not, I think I understand why the markets would react the way they did, but I also know that since China became part of the international,
and they stabilized sort of the following day.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I mean, China's been in WTO and the international trade system since, well, the end of 2001, so really 2002 on. And they've been doing this sort of thing pretty consistently for that entire period of time. So like 16 years or so. And they were doing it before as well. And, I think the administration's response is, sure, ideally, multilateral talks and negotiations and all that would be the way to go. But administration after administration after administration has tried this to essentially no effect. And the magnitude of Chinese intellectual property theft is staggering. Estimates, it's difficult to get a good sense just because of the nature of the problem. We're talking anywhere between 170 to $600 billion every single year. That's
and the issue is also, again, in years past, in the early 2000s, when China first joined the WTO, this problem was they were doing it, but the magnitude was so much smaller, and China was not the big player that it is now.
Yeah, their economy's so much bigger now, and
so we were willing to sort of look the other way for a while because it's like whatever, but yeah.
Well, and another problem, but again, on the other hand, a problem is it's a lot easier for China to retaliate against us than it is for us to hit them. And that's just because a lot of the things that we send to China are direct exports, like soybeans, agricultural products, that sort of thing, where a lot of things that are China trade are, part of these kind of long supply chains that affect a lot of other countries. So we have a lot more difficulty hitting them directly than they do hitting back against us directly. So it is, you're right, kind of a blunt remedy. But on the other hand, I feel like, we've been talking about this problem for years and years, and it doesn't seem to be getting a whole lot better. And the bigger China's economy gets, you would think the less inclined they would be to knuckle under to this sort of thing, because they can force, U.S. companies to give up their trade secrets and so forth, because that Chinese market is so attractive. And so I don't know that this is going to work, but I certainly can understand the logic behind it. And I think there is a logic behind what they're doing. Originally it was said that the original plan that was presented to the president was for $30 billion in tariffs. And he basically said, no, that's not enough. Let's double it, which sounds like a very Trumpian sort of thing to do. But maybe this is one of these situations that calls for this sort of action. Maybe this is the sort of thing, if we don't try to do something about this now, it just gets harder and harder over time. And I don't know if that's exactly right, but I think you can make a case for that.
Yeah, no, I think he's certainly sending the message. My point would be you can maybe send that message in a more focused laser beam kind of way that's not going to have the impact on the rest of the U.S. economy that broad tariffs do.
Right. And that's going back to the steel and aluminum thing, which was on ostensibly national security grounds, which we know to be a bogus claim, essentially. Yeah. I think that's a good point. It's a good point. All right. Well, before we move on, we would like to thank our newest supporters. First, we have Carolina, who made an extremely generous donation to the show through PayPal, and she included a message with that donation. She says, Mike and Jay, you guys are the best. I love the way you both see the world and analyze all of its craziness in thoughtful, compassionate, and measured ways. I know you
Well,
get.
thank you,
Oh, yeah, I
Carolina.
thought that was nice. Yeah, I know you get some heat from time to time because you're either not taking a strong position or you're not being passionate enough. Yes, we do. Although I'm a diehard liberal and Mike is my if you could have dinner with anyone guy, Jay, I so appreciate the way you present the conservative perspective. Oh, that's nice.
I've had dinner with Mike. It's not that great. Yeah.
She says, I respect you, often disagree with you, but I'm always interested in hearing from you. And I think that is the reason I absolutely love your guys' show. Thanks for
Well, thank
brightening
you.
my LA commute. So I thought that
Thank
was
you.
that was extraordinarily nice, and thank you so much, Carolina. If I do ever get out to LA, we should definitely try to arrange a dinner. All right. Well, next we have Nick, our newest monthly sustaining supporter through Patreon. Thank you, Nick, so much. We really appreciate it. And finally, this week, Jesse, who donated to support the show through our PayPal option. So thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
Jesse.
Nick and Jesse.
And when you make a pledge of financial support to the show, we always enjoy including a message from you in the shout out. And so if there's anything you'd like to pass along, you can include the message both in Patreon and PayPal as part of your contribution, but you can also just send us a message at mail@politicsguys.com, and we really enjoy hearing from you. And of course, listener support, it's what makes the show possible. And if you'd like to join Carolina, Nick, Jesse, and all of our other great Politics Guys supporters, just go to politicsguys.com/support, or just click on the Patreon or PayPal links that you'll see at the site. Thanks so much. All right, well, more bad news for Facebook this week after revelations that Cambridge Analytica, a conservative political marketing firm with close ties to former top Trump advisor Steve Bannon, improperly used data from around 50 million people in violation of Facebook's data privacy policy. The data came from researcher Alexandra Kogan, who through a psychological profile app called This Is Your Digital Life, which ran on Facebook in 2014, where around 270,000 Facebook users took that, but the app also collected data from users' friends as well. Now, Kogan says he was never told that the data would be used for political targeting, and Cambridge Analytica has denied wrongdoing, though they have suspended their CEO. And then Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg pledged to better protect the privacy of users, and he said that the company will further restrict access to data. Now, Facebook has struggled to deal with this issue of user privacy in the past, and in fact, it's currently under a 2011 consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission that's related to user privacy. And the FTC has now launched a new investigation in light of these recent developments. So what's your take on all this, Jay?
I'm sort of of a couple different minds on this. On the first, I don't believe I ever took that survey. I don't take many,
You're
Facebook
skeptical of those things, sure.
Well, I mean, exactly. I'm skeptical of what's the value of which Hogwarts house should you belong to? I'm not I'm not sure how that helps folks down the road, but but I don't know. I didn't take this one, so maybe this is more detailed. So look, obviously, if there are contractual agreements to protect privacy and they violated them, that's a big problem, and they ought to be punished accordingly. Facebook has already been punished pretty severely. I think as of, I want to say Thursday, I didn't look yesterday, but I think they've lost about $50 billion in stock value, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean,
even for Facebook.
When you and I talk about, I mean, I think you mentioned some of this stuff in the spending bill. We're talking about, several $100 million. This is again orders of magnitude for a private company. Now, again, the stock value, it's not necessarily real money yet, but still, that is a significant hit. And I think, I think we're going to have to come to a reckoning. I don't think it's going to be in this year. I think it's something probably over the next, 5 years or so of just how we live with social media, because there are so many different facets of what's going on. And then, one of these is privacy. Others have to do with, the fake news, the cyberbullying, all these issues that were sort of the unexpected consequences. And someone, I don't remember who wrote this, but gosh, I should look it up. It was a great article about that Facebook started with with the sort of naive assumption about human nature that what people would do with it would, they'd, connect with their friends and they'd share cat pictures and kid pictures, and so forth, and that, no one would use this tool in sort of a negative fashion. Although if you think back to its actual origins, um, there may be some reason to argue against that. Again, if you've seen the movie, there was sort of the idea was, how to, a way to pick up girls kind of thing. But um, so I think that's it's just, as a society, we're going to have to come to some better way of dealing with this. And the other thing that's interesting, not just the financial losses that Facebook took, but its user numbers and its engagement with users has been dropping fairly significantly over the last year. And I know I for one, don't look at Facebook as often as I used to. Um, and So I don't know. I think those are things that this is bigger than just a data analytics analytica story. It goes to the whole nature of social media, and something's going to work itself out.
Well, I agree with you broadly about that. But in terms of user numbers, Facebook's growth has certainly slowed. But I believe they still are adding around 500,000 new users every single day. So there's still a lot of
Most of them
growth.
are well, assuming those are real people,
And
not
not
fake
Russian
Russians.
bots, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But it seems to me that the fundamental problem here, Mark Zuckerberg has been on the hot seat, and about how Facebook has affected things and elections and that sort of thing. When you're talking about that sort of size, the number of users, they generate something like one estimate is 4 petabytes of new data every single day. I mean, there's so much going on there. It's difficult for them to keep up and to actually know what's going on a platform that's big, even the best
yeah,
algorithms.
yeah.
But a second point, this gets to, I think, the heart of what you were saying, is that it's the whole model of Facebook. Facebook is not a charity. Facebook is not designed to make the world a better place or anything like that, despite what Mark Zuckerberg might say. Facebook is a commercial enterprise, and they are designed to make money. And Facebook is also seemingly free. And there's that old saying, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. And we are the product here. Now, our data, our likes, and all that sort of thing. And I think that's a much bigger deal to people like you and me. We're almost kind of the last generation that has what I would call an old-fashioned notion, a pre-internet notion of privacy,
Sure.
maybe. And that's, I think people are starting to see what that means. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and this data is, if it's collected, it is going to be used for better or for worse, for good or for evil. And so I think we're just seeing that. I don't think this problem goes away. Certainly, I don't think there's anything that Mark Zuckerberg can do to make this problem go away. I mean,
No,
without
that's, I mean,
destroying his whole
I
business
agree.
model.
I don't think there is a government regulation or a corporate action that someone can take that would just change this. I think it's a societal
Yeah.
reckoning of you just kind of get to the point of this is how you, again, now this is going to be very, very Burkean. Um, you evolve sort of new manners and
Yeah.
new traditions to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think just there's a lack of understanding and appreciation, because all this data mining goes on in the background, how significant it can be. And the concern is that, does this happen too late? I mean, once all this data is out there, it's out there, and people don't necessarily realize that. I don't mean to sound like some paranoid Ron Swanson type character or anything like that, but yeah, I think it's a very real concern. And just passing a law, or an FTC investigation, that's only going to focus on whether any laws were broken.
Right.
But in this case, when the entire business model is based on you acquiescing to having your data
You
used,
surrendering, you're essentially selling them your privacy. That's
yes.
the nature of the transaction.
Yeah, and anyone who isn't a little bit concerned about that, I think, is maybe not sufficiently aware of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because I mean, I would like to interested in your thoughts, because this is something we differ on, is to the extent this privacy goes to political data that can be used then for ads and so forth. I mean, my sense is that I don't know how effective that is.
Right.
I mean, there is sort of an argument. I mean, the same thing could be said of television, and in the 1950s or something, that there was this boom of all of a sudden everyone's buying television sets. Um, and is there a concern about they could receive all sorts of messages that might not be true, might be targeted to them, and so forth, and they might act accordingly? But I think there's sort of a human nature, and this is what I was, I guess, trying to get at a bigger social reckoning, that at some point you discount a lot of what you see on TV, right? You ignore the commercials. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, my sense, and maybe I'm blind. Maybe the manipulation is so good that you don't even know you're being manipulated. But I can't think of any Facebook ad that or post that is sort of, I don't know, swayed me to do one thing or
Right.
the other.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of political science and other psychological, social science research on this, and my take on sort of looking at the breadth of it is that certainly these things can't change people's opinions, but what they can do on the margins is find people who are maybe in between somewhere, who are kind of on the fence, and perhaps slowly move them over, or slowly move people over into kind of an information stream that can gradually move them. So again, this is not the sort of thing that's going to have huge immediate impacts, but it certainly can have big impacts at the margins. And so when we're talking about things like closely divided elections or a closely divided country where, at the margins can make a real difference, well, then that could potentially have a significant impact,
But I mean, the sense that there's this, again, it's sort of like the Jedi mind trick sort of thing.
Sure, and that's not you.
That's
Right.
able to,
No. But again, I think, most people are not as sophisticated as you are. Most people,
that's a given.
Oh yeah. So, but and so that I think is important to keep in mind, and so these ads probably aren't designed to change your mind,
Yeah.
and so, but who they are designed to change, I think they can have a significant impact, but again, at the margins, but sometimes the margins are pretty important.
The Force has a strong influence on the weak-minded.
Oh, okay. I'll let you. I'll let you say
Obi-Wan
that.
said, but yeah.
Okay. There you go. All right. Jay, it is. I should mention it's finally official. Republican Rick Saccone conceded defeat to Democrat Connor Lamb in that election to fill Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district. Now, this was, of course, after the former incumbent Republican Tim Murphy resigned following allegations that Murphy, who was family values and pro-life, had an extramarital affair and then urged his mistress to have an abortion. Not really a good move,
Right,
certainly.
Right.
Now, the district seemed like a slam dunk for Republicans. I mean, President Trump won it by 20 points in 2016 also. And in the last two elections, Democrats didn't even bother to run anyone against Murphy. But there you go. So first off, I guess, what do you make of the victory here?
I would be cautious as to read too much into it as an anti-Trump message. I think it is an anti, I guess, for lack of a better word, the incumbent who was thrown out. When you consider the Democrat Connor Lamb, who really ran as a fairly, not fairly, I'd say pretty conservative Democrat.
Oh yeah.
He was pro-life. He was a former. Was he a Marine? He was in the military.
Yeah.
I thought you would know, but he ran sort of against Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. Kind of pro-gun.
Pro-gun. In fact, he even pledged that if elected, he would not vote for Nancy Pelosi, and were the Democrats to win the House as for Speaker. So that's hard to say that's an anti-Trump wave, in that he sort of captured some of the cultural pieces that would appeal to Trump voters, and the Republican really, I don't think ran a great campaign. But so anyway, my takeaway is this is sort of the the argument I think I've made on the other side that Democrats do better when they run more moderate to conservative candidates as opposed to the far left progressives that they've tried before.
Yeah.
So
I think it
remains to be seen. So I think he's an exception to what most of the candidates who are going to be running are going to be bringing to the table.
Yeah. Well, I agree in part, and certainly in that sort of district, anyone who wasn't a very conservative Democrat wouldn't have had a chance at all. But of course, you have to take a look at what the district looked like and match a candidate to the district, which is why I'm uncomfortable about arguments that my party as a whole should move further left, and that might work fine in certain districts, but not so much in districts like Pennsylvania's 18th. And another
the districts where it's going to work, it's already worked.
Well, I
you know what I mean?
I would somewhat disagree with that, because I think that there's an awful lot of Democratic enthusiasm and not nearly as much Republican enthusiasm. I think that's going to be a big help. I think this is just one more sign that it's reasonable to expect some pretty significant Democratic gains in November. And then we'll see what that brings, especially given the fact that President Trump seems to have kind of started surrounding himself with people who think a lot more like him. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I can certainly see the thought of President Trump coming up against a Democratic Congress that is bound and determined to investigate and issue subpoenas and do all that sort of thing. That could be I'm sure that could be. The media will see it as entertaining, but I think it also could be fairly tragic for the country. But I am certainly hoping for that Democratic majority. I should also point out that
despite the tragedy,
well, just the fact
tragic
that,
for the country, but I'm rooting for.
Well, just the fact that, and I guess you're right. I should explain that, meaning that I think President Trump's responses, I wouldn't be surprised if they became more and more unhinged, leading to him doing something that makes what he's done to this point look almost normal by comparison. So, but I do believe that we need at least part of one branch of government to stand in opposition to a president who I think is already somewhat out of control. I should point out, though, that Connor Lamb is not going to have a lot of time to settle in. He's actually facing a May primary, though he's not going to be running in the 18th district, but in the newly created 17th district. And that's actually a district that's more favorable to Democrats. You could hardly find a district that's less favorable to Democrats. And I believe
which ironically is less favorable to Connor Lamb and more favorable to her primary challenger.
Yeah. Good point. And Rick Saccone, I believe, is also going to be running for a seat in the new 14th district. And the reason why these districts are new is this is after Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision or creation, to create new districts throughout the state. And this followed the court concluding that the very strongly Republican favoring district structure that's been in place was a violation of Pennsylvania's state constitution. And then state lawmakers weren't able to agree on a new redistricting plan, so the court imposed its own. Republicans were very upset about that, but the United States Supreme Court didn't want to get involved, which isn't surprising because the court generally avoids telling the highest court in the state how to interpret its own state constitution. Yeah. So I think what the Democrats are looking forward to and can reasonably expect to pick up a few more seats in Pennsylvania. Even they would have done that even, I think, had things stayed the same. But again, I think November is shaping up to look very, very positive for Democrats. Not just this, but also we see there's been a huge wave of Republican retirements, many more than we normally see and many more than Democrats are having. I am fairly confident that there will be a Democratic House of Representatives in January of 2019, and I say thank God.
All right, you're making the prediction early. Okay.
I am making a prediction early. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, moving on. There's been another big shakeup at the White House. We say this every week, don't we, Jay? This week, President Trump announced that the replacement of National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster with former George W. Bush UN Ambassador John Bolton. Now, Bolton, who doesn't have to be confirmed by the Senate, will be the president's third national security advisor in 14 months. He'll also almost certainly be a better fit with the president than McMaster. Trump reportedly grew frustrated with him due to his, not too hawkish stances on North Korea and Iran, as well as his detailed national security briefings, which the president apparently did not appreciate very much. And Bolton, apparently Donald Trump kind of warmed to him after hearing him a number of times on Fox News. That's wonderful. Bolton was probably the most undiplomatic UN ambassador we've ever had. He's a major foreign policy hawk, and he's actually openly argued for a first strike against North Korea. Okay. Now, this announcement was said to come as a surprise to a lot of people in the White House. Again, I say this an awful lot. Not so much that McMaster was being let go, but the timing of it. Chief of Staff John Kelly was reportedly hoping to combine the announcement of McMaster leaving with similar announcements for Veteran Affairs Secretary David Shulkin and Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson, both
so
of
we
whom
wouldn't have to do this each and every week.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Because both Shulkin and Carson have come under fire for, I think you could call it fairly extravagant personal spending with taxpayer money. So Jay, what do you make of the latest White House shakeup?
Well, the Bolton thing, I think if you're saying it's surprising because the timing and why wasn't it done together, yeah, I think so. But the substance of it, Bolton is someone who had been on Trump's Secretary of State shortlist. He's someone who's on TV, so Trump likes that. But from what I've read, he's been sort of an informal advisor to Trump during the campaign and after. So I don't think the Bolton choice in and of itself is surprising.
Agreed.
Bolton is, as much as he is painted to be out, he's sort of a mainstream sort of figure. He worked in both Bush administrations, even the Bush that you liked. And yes, he's more hawkish than McMaster, but I don't see. I don't see a big change here. And again, this is someone who George W. Bush had appointed interim UN ambassador, and you say he was undiplomatic with the UN, and I say bully for him. So,
sure.
But. Yeah, I think it's probably a better fit, and I don't, you can disagree with Bolton, but I don't think he could be described as a lightweight.
No, he's certainly not a lightweight. But I guess the thing that is of more concern to me is that what we see, and we see this to a certain extent, I think, with a lot of presidents, is that they start to surround themselves with people who think and see the world very much like they do, and especially given that Donald Trump is, I think it's fair to say, a fairly strong and impulsive personality, surrounding himself with more strong and impulsive personalities who will egg him on in the way he's already intended to go. I think people
I think Bolton, I would say Bolton's strong. I don't know that he's impulsive, though.
Well, maybe
and
you're right.
I'm not sure. It's sometimes tough to figure out exactly if the president is surrounding himself with people of his own mind, because you don't really know what his mind is on any given day.
Well, I think he likes people who he feels like are no BS type people who are just willing. That's why I get the impulsive part of that sort of thing, I guess, where I think that comes from. But someone like a McMaster is somebody who I think had, or at least made an attempt to sort of provide counter arguments, to give the president a more nuanced view of the world, to try to give him a sense of how people who don't think like Donald Trump might see things and why that might be a good idea to keep in mind. And I think that's valuable for any president, but I think it's particularly valuable for a president who has so little background in policy and governance and politics as Donald Trump. And so that's why I think this is a very dangerous thing, especially given the fact that, I can foresee a situation where come January of 2019, there's going to be even more clashes. And do we want a president who's just surrounding himself with a bunch of like-minded folks and just saying, to hell with you all, I'm going to do this, and his advisor saying, go, man, go? That doesn't sound very good to me.
All right. Well, we'll see. But again, I would hesitate to say dangerous.
Well, but with the
Again,
North Korea
you can.
situation, and you have a national security advisor who's advocated first strike, I would call that dangerous.
Well,
I
well,
wouldn't
I
go
don't know
so.
that I
I've
don't know
said,
if he advocated, or I know he made sort of the legal case that it would be permissible.
yeah, I think he's made an
But
argument that it might be the best alternative before North Korea goes any further if we're serious about
yeah,
them not getting weapons. I guess my
but
sense
and
is,
my point is he may be right.
well, I think he may be right. I agree with you there. I don't think that there's really any way we're going to stop North Korea from, I don't think we're going to get them to denuclearize. I would be extraordinarily surprised. We've talked about this before. But again, I just think that given the situation, what it is, it seems that he's more inclined to use force. And I think that's not necessarily great. I'm not going to go so far as call it terrifying, like a Vox type of way of putting it, but I certainly am concerned, and I think Donald Trump would do well to surround himself with people who push back against his own worst instincts, and God knows he has a
Yeah,
lot of them.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, it is time for what we're reading, where we step back from all these crazy things happening in a news cycle and talk about the more in-depth, thoughtful things we're reading, listening to, or watching. Why don't you start us off today? What are you, Jay? What are you reading?
Oh man, can I take a pass this week because it's been a tough week.
Sometimes you have one of those weeks.
I'll say
Absolutely.
no. I will say there was a really good piece in the Wall Street Journal Saturday essay on sort of the nature of truth, and it's sort of, are we living in a post-truth world? And I'm forgetting the author right now because that's the kind of week I have. But it's by the same guy who wrote Plato and the Googleplex.
Okay. Yeah, it was actually, I think that's Rebecca Goldstein, I think it is.
Yes, Rebecca Goldstein. I also would have to point out, and this isn't one of those, with what we're reading, we try to go for like the bigger picture thing. This isn't necessarily a bigger picture thing, but it does have a lot about political philosophy and Hegel, and also discussions of porn stars and Simpsons references and Godfather references.
Jonah Goldberg.
And it's Jonah Goldberg.
Yeah.
His G file, which the title alone is fantastic. The Gathering Stormy. So again, I don't want to say it's lightweight because again, there's a lot of discussion of Hegelian dialectics and so forth. But if you enjoy just sort of the Jonah Goldberg sort of free form association kind of thing and the pop culture references, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think if Jay wrote a column, it would look very much like Jonah Goldberg's column. So
Yes.
if you like Jay, you almost certainly will like Jonah Goldberg. He's definitely worth reading, and I read him all the time, which is why I knew exactly where you were going with that one. So, well, my thing for this week is I'm reading something that it seems like everyone else in the world is reading right now, if Amazon is to be believed. Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life: An Antidote to Chaos.
Yeah.
I'm a little late to the game here. Obviously, Jordan Peterson is huge on YouTube, online, and so I'm sure many of our listeners are very familiar with him. Now, I heard him first on Sam Harris's podcast. I'm a big fan of Sam Harris. They had this crazy, frustrating, hour-plus long argument over what it means for something to be true, and I practically wanted to reach through the internet and just strangle both Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson because they were so clearly talking past each other, and they had to know that. I was particularly upset at Sam Harris because, could you just move on, Sam? But anyway, I thought, from what I got from that, I thought this guy sounds pretty interesting, and so I listened to some of the other podcasts that he's done. I listened to his own podcast. He has his own show, and what was odd to me is that I've been seeing more and more about him in the media, but what I read about him, and particularly in a lot of the left of center outlets that I read, was so very different from what I heard him saying in all of these podcast appearances. And so I decided, well, I want to go right to the source and see what he actually is saying. And my sense so far, and I'm not that far into it, but my sense so far is that Peterson focuses a lot on personal responsibility, getting your own life in order. He also argues that hierarchies, dominance hierarchies, are inherent in nature and they're not socially constructed, or at least not entirely socially constructed. And I think, especially for people who are on the far left, that's very difficult for them to hear and accept. And so they just naturally sort of lash out against that sort of thing. And I want to say, I know some of our listeners are certainly further left than I am. And I understand the concern of people on the left. And I think there's this concern that some people on the right, use personal responsibility and, well, the hierarchies are common in nature, that sort of thing, to sort of downplay the very real and very pernicious effects of societally created oppression and discrimination and those sort of things, because those things absolutely exist. And there are conservatives who do that, who use that as a way to kind of, as a sort of an excuse, if you will, or a rationalization. Now, I don't get the sense that Peterson is one of those people, but to be fair, I've only just started reading the book and maybe I'll have a different conclusion, but I certainly think that people can take what he uses and twist it in a way to make, to promote some sort of a very negative type of message that is very hurtful. But it seems to me that Peterson himself is not doing that. And I actually think there's a lot of value so far in my understanding of what he has to say. And so I'll be sure to update people as I go along.
I haven't read the book. I've read other articles that he's written, and again, some things written about him. Also, there is the absolutely hilarious interview of his with someone on British TV.
Oh yeah.
Which again sort of highlights the frustrations the right has with the left. But from everything I've taken away, and from talking to people who have read it, is it's really sort of like stuff your parents told you growing up anyway. It's sort of, hey, the world doesn't owe you a living. I think that sort of thing.
I think it's stuff that people's parents used to tell them.
Okay.
And I think maybe, I know that your parents told you that. I know that my parents told me that, to kind of inculcate a sense of humility and a non-entitlement, and you have to work for what you get and all that sort of thing.
Get off your ass and go mow the lawn. Yeah.
But I think his argument is that more and more parents are maybe not telling that message, not because they want their children to fail, but because they think that it somehow, squelches their development and that sort of thing. And he argues, I think, that this is moving in a wrong direction and is actually creating people who are less capable and less competent, and that hurts us all. And I think there's some truth to that message. So that is my recommendation for the week. Though maybe I'll be done. Maybe by next week I'll be done with it and say, "Oh my God, this man is a menace and he should be stopped." That sort of thing. But we'll see. Anyway, all right. Well, that does it for this episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We hope you liked what you heard. Listener support is what keeps the show going. We truly do appreciate it. So if you'd like to help us out, go to politicsguys.com/support. That's a direct link. Or you can just go to politicsguys.com and go to support in the main menu and click on the Patreon or PayPal links you'll see there. Now, subscribing to the show also really helps, as does sharing episodes. It's easy to do right in your podcast app. Just click on the little share symbol, that little triangle thing usually. And because word of mouth is really the best advertising, and we really do appreciate it. We also appreciate if you could leave reviews and ratings of the show on iTunes. If you've got a question, comment, correction, or just a random thought you want to share with us, you can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. There's our Facebook page where you can message us, and we'll repost stuff throughout the week. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.